We live in an incredibly strange reality where the absolute truth is often completely ignored in favor of a terrifying fiction, despite having infinite access to real-time facts. People instantly choose to believe that a shadowy group is secretly controlling the globe. The hard economic data is widely available for anyone to read, completely breaking down the complex mechanics of our modern markets. Yet a massive portion of society completely dismisses these objective numbers when presented with a thrilling, dark narrative instead. We are drowning in a massive ocean of verifiable information, but we consistently choose to drink from the cup of collective paranoia. Why does a terrifying story about global manipulation always easily defeat a spreadsheet full of highly accurate, verifiable facts? It forces us to ask a deeply profound question about the fundamental wiring of our own consciousness and daily perception. Why does our highly evolved brain so quickly surrender to fear while completely rejecting the boring, objective reality of data? This is not just a simple debate between internet conspiracies and academic macroeconomic statistics. It is a profound look into the deeply flawed, highly fascinating way the human mind constantly edits its own reality. We selectively cut out the boring truths and heavily highlight the terrifying suspense, creating a highly distorted final cut of the world. To truly understand this phenomenon, we must first completely acknowledge a difficult truth about our own biological design. The human brain was never fundamentally designed to logically process raw numbers or complex abstract systemic data. It is, at its absolute biological core, an ancient machine built entirely to process and heavily remember compelling stories. Data is incredibly cold, profoundly complex, and requires a massive amount of deliberate intellectual effort to properly digest. It forces our brains to aggressively consume precious energy just to understand a single, boring macroeconomic trend. A dark narrative, on the other hand, is perfectly simple, highly emotional, and completely effortless to immediately understand. It completely bypasses our critical thinking filters and strikes directly at the ancient primal core of our nervous systems. When you look at a deeply complex economic chart showing shifting global supply chains, your brain instantly feels exhausted and overwhelmed. But when a charismatic voice simply whispers that a secret elite is actively stealing your future, your mind instantly engages. Our ancestors absolutely did not survive the brutal wilderness by analyzing massive spreadsheets or calculating complex statistical probabilities. They survived entirely by listening to urgent, life-saving stories told nervously around the safety of a burning campfire. We are fundamentally, biologically wired to deeply connect with a clear protagonist, a terrifying villain, and a massive, overarching conflict. A grand conspiracy theory perfectly supplies absolutely all of these narrative elements in one highly digestible, thrilling package. The human mind will almost always choose a beautifully framed lie over a poorly presented, overwhelmingly complex truth. This natural, deep preference for storytelling is the absolute foundational reason why dark narratives spread with such terrifying, unstoppable speed. We desperately crave a clear beginning, a dramatic middle, and a highly satisfying conclusion to the chaotic events around us. Data rarely provides this satisfying arc, often presenting a messy, highly inconclusive picture of a constantly shifting global reality. When forced to choose between a boring, inconclusive reality and a thrilling, absolute certainty, the brain chooses the thrill. But our intense attraction to the darkness goes much deeper than just a simple preference for a good story. We are heavily burdened by a powerful, ancient evolutionary survival mechanism widely known in psychology as the negativity bias. Human beings are biologically programmed to focus intensely on negative information, while entirely ignoring positive or neutral data. This deeply ingrained instinct exists simply because, in the ancient, unforgiving world, ignoring a threat meant absolute, instant death. Missing out on a beautiful sunset had zero consequences, but failing to notice a lurking predator was a fatal mistake. Therefore, our brains actively evolved to treat every single terrifying piece of information as a top priority. Emergency. In our modern, highly connected society, this exact same survival mechanism constantly works against our own profound mental peace. When we hear a highly dramatic narrative about an impending global economic collapse, our brain immediately flags it as a massive threat. This naturally makes the terrifying fiction infinitely more important and incredibly more real than any boring economic statistic. Our internal alarm bells ring so incredibly loudly that we completely lose the profound ability to rationally analyze the actual situation. We become entirely consumed by the perceived danger, actively seeking out even more negative information to confirm our deepest fears. The negativity bias essentially transforms our daily reality into a terrifying horror movie where every shadow hides a massive global conspiracy. This perfectly explains exactly why positive economic data or gradual societal progress rarely makes it to the front page of our minds. Good news simply does not trigger the intense primal survival instincts that effectively keep our eyes glued to the incoming threats. However, the absolute most profound psychological reason we cling to these dark stories is the desperate human need for control. When the global economy violently fluctuates and our personal lives feel entirely unstable, we naturally experience a profound, terrifying helplessness. We absolutely hate the terrible feeling of being tossed around in a massive storm without any ability to steer the ship. A dark narrative about a highly organized secret global cabal surprisingly offers a deeply comforting illusion to a highly anxious mind. It secretly promises that there is an actual steering wheel to the universe, even if an evil driver is currently holding it. Believing that a powerful, invisible group is intentionally causing the chaos is significantly less terrifying than accepting the brutal actual truth. The reality that our world is an incredibly complex, naturally chaotic system with absolutely nobody in control is deeply unsettling. We heavily prefer the illusion of an organized, meticulously rigged game over the terrifying reality of sheer, unadulterated global randomness. If someone is intentionally orchestrating the misery, then the world has a logical structure, and the chaos can theoretically be stopped. This deeply flawed psychological defense mechanism allows us to neatly categorize our profound, complex anxieties into a single, defeated enemy. It completely removes the incredibly heavy burden of fully accepting that some massive events are simply beyond any human control. By focusing absolutely all our anger on a highly fictional elite, we completely avoid the difficult task of building true internal resilience. We desperately trade our profound mental clarity for a cheap, highly comforting story that perfectly validates our feelings of victimhood. True emotional freedom requires bravely accepting the chaos and focusing our energy entirely on the specific daily actions we can actually command. We must deeply internalize the ancient wisdom that we cannot control the external macroeconomy. Only our internal, highly disciplined response to it. But a grand, deeply dark narrative perfectly excuses us from ever doing that incredibly difficult, deeply necessary internal work. This natural, profound human vulnerability is then aggressively exploited and massively amplified by the modern digital platforms we use every day. We are currently living inside an entirely unprecedented ecosystem, where human attention is the absolute most valuable, highly contested global currency. The highly advanced algorithms that completely dictate our daily information diet absolutely do not care about objective truth or nuanced financial data. They are ruthlessly optimized to simply keep you scrolling, and absolutely nothing drives massive digital engagement quite like collective intense fear. When a skilled content creator frames a highly complex global event as a sinister plot, the algorithm immediately rewards that dramatic framing. The dramatic, highly edited narrative perfectly hooks the viewer's primal emotions, ensuring that the video goes incredibly viral across the globe. Meanwhile, a highly educational video breaking down the exact same macroeconomic event using objective data will severely struggle to find any traction. It completely lacks the sharp, intensely emotional hook required to successfully break through the massive, impenetrable wall of endless digital noise. This creates a highly toxic, deeply manipulated environment where the absolute most extreme, terrifying narratives are constantly pushed to the very top. We are relentlessly bombarded with highly edited, perfectly cut stories of impending societal doom until our perception is completely altered. The algorithm actively acts as a massive magnifying glass, catching the scattered rays of our natural anxiety and focusing them into a burning fire. It actively and efficiently traps us in massive digital echo chambers, where the dark narratives are continuously repeated until they feel undeniably real. Because we see the exact same terrifying story everywhere we look. Our heavily biased brain eventually entirely accepts it as the absolute truth. The sheer, overwhelming volume of the dark narrative simply drowns out any logical, highly data-driven counterargument that might actually exist. We absolutely must deeply understand that objective data does not lose these massive battles, because it is factually incorrect or completely flawed. Data simply loses because it is incredibly slow, deeply nuanced, and entirely devoid of the thrilling cinematic emotion we secretly crave. Understanding raw, unedited economic data requires a massive amount of historical context, deep patience, and a complete willingness to embrace boring reality. A viral, dark narrative requires absolutely nothing from the viewer except a basic, primal willingness to feel intense, righteous anger. The terrifying story is incredibly fast, instantly relatable, and incredibly easy to passionately recall during a heated conversation with friends. It perfectly weaponizes our own profound psychological laziness, openly offering a thrilling shortcut to feeling like we finally understand the chaotic world. We completely fool ourselves into genuinely believing we are uncovering massive truths when we are actually just consuming highly targeted, fear-based entertainment. The complex data is simply outmatched by the sheer, highly engaging production value of the grand conspiracy theories we absolutely love to watch. This massive daily battle for our human perception is not really a fair fight between internet conspiracies and complex macroeconomic facts. It is fundamentally a massive, ongoing struggle against the deeply ingrained, incredibly flawed processing systems of our own ancient human minds. We are essentially fighting a brutal war against our own biology in a highly modern, entirely digitized world, perfectly designed to completely exploit it. To truly and permanently win this fight, we must actively force ourselves to completely step back and deeply question our own automatic reactions. Whenever a highly dark, terrifying narrative feels incredibly true, we must actively pause and ask ourselves a very profound, uncomfortable question. Are we actually seeking the cold, objective truth? Or are we simply desperately searching for a highly dramatic story that perfectly matches our anxiety? The absolute most comfortable lie will always feel significantly better than the cold, heavy, and incredibly complex macroeconomic truth. But actively building your entire foundational worldview on a highly unstable foundation of algorithmic fear is a guaranteed recipe for permanent, paralyzing anxiety. We have to completely train our incredibly powerful minds to actively crave the boring data, the nuanced context, and the complex reality. We must fiercely protect our own absolute mental sovereignty by completely refusing to let dramatic, viral narratives dictate our fragile emotional state. True psychological power strictly comes from looking directly at the massive chaos of the world and absolutely refusing to invent a monster to blame. It comes entirely from accepting the terrifying, beautiful complexity and deeply focusing on precisely navigating the massive storm with absolute clarity. We must aggressively learn to become the highly disciplined editors of our own reality, actively cutting out the highly toxic viral panic. We need to intentionally splice together a highly accurate, profoundly clear vision of the world, entirely based on observable, highly objective facts. The massive, deeply complex economic systems of our world are absolutely not a highly orchestrated movie with a perfectly cast villain. They are a wildly unpredictable, highly organic series of chaotic events that require deep, profound critical thinking to truly comprehend. If we continuously surrender to the easy, highly thrilling narratives, we permanently forfeit our profound ability to intelligently adapt to real changes. We become perfectly trapped in a highly convincing, deeply terrifying illusion, endlessly fighting invisible global enemies that entirely exist within our own minds. This massive distraction actively prevents us from deeply mastering the highly valuable skills needed to actually thrive in a rapidly changing economy. The highly viral algorithms absolutely do not care about your personal long-term financial success or your profound psychological well-being. They only deeply care about intensely keeping you inside the highly profitable loop of endless outrage, deep suspicion, and highly engaging paranoia. Breaking completely free from this highly toxic digital loop requires a radical, absolute commitment to deep intellectual honesty and profound self-awareness. You must actively choose to completely embrace the highly uncomfortable, deeply boring reality of data over the massive adrenaline rush of a grand theory. This is an incredibly difficult, deeply unnatural pivot for the human brain to make, but it is the absolute foundation of true wisdom. When you finally stop aggressively seeking the hidden, massive conspiracies, you suddenly regain an incredible amount of wasted, highly valuable mental energy. You can actively redirect that profound energy entirely toward truly understanding the incredibly complex forces that genuinely shape our modern global society. You can deeply study the actual historical mechanics of inflation, entirely, without needing to forcefully invent a secretive evil banking cabal. You can profoundly analyze the incredibly rapid rise of artificial intelligence, entirely without needing to believe in a highly coordinated dystopian global reset. The absolute truth is always sitting quietly right there in the incredibly dense, highly boring data, patiently waiting for a disciplined mind to read it. But it will absolutely never scream as loudly, perform as dramatically, or immediately trend as virally as the highly weaponized, incredibly dark narratives do. Completely relies on your profound individual ability to actively rise above the deafening digital noise and deliberately seek out the quiet facts. This active, highly conscious pursuit of the objective truth is the absolute ultimate rebellion against a massive, deeply manipulative modern media landscape. It is a profound, deeply personal declaration that you absolutely refuse to have your powerful mind seamlessly hijacked by cheap, algorithmic fear. So the very next time you feel a massive wave of intense panic actively rising from a perfectly packaged, highly viral doomsday video, immediately stop. Take a profound, highly conscious breath, entirely detach yourself from the immediate emotional hook, and aggressively demand to see the raw, unedited data. If the highly dramatic, terrifying claims entirely collapse without the highly emotional, suspenseful music and the perfectly placed dramatic pauses, it is just a story. It is merely a highly engaging, deeply psychological reflection of our own collective societal stress, absolutely disguised as a profound hidden truth. Ultimately, the very things that are the absolute easiest for our ancient brains to quickly believe are rarely the things that are actually accurate. Sometimes, the absolute most highly convincing, deeply viral story is simply the one that perfectly mirrors our own deepest, most fundamentally hidden fears. The entire world is a vastly complex, incredibly messy, a deeply unpredictable place that completely defies all simple, highly dark explanations. Embrace that profoundly beautiful, massive, chaotic complexity and utterly refuse to let a terrifying, highly viral fiction completely control your beautiful mind. We constantly forget that throughout the vast expanse of human history, the absolute most monumental shifts were rarely the result of a singular, perfect plan. They were the highly messy, completely uncoordinated results of massive technological breakthroughs, violently colliding with highly outdated, incredibly fragile social structures. The highly chaotic nature of these massive historical transitions naturally bred intense, widespread paranoia among the deeply confused, terrified general public. The exact same profound psychological mechanisms that entirely convinced ancient societies of evil curses are currently convincing us of massive global resets. The only fundamental difference is the incredibly sophisticated, highly advanced digital medium through which these ancient fear-based stories are constantly delivered today. We possess highly advanced smartphones, yet we actively view the deeply complex global economy through the exact same terrified lens as our primitive ancestors. We must aggressively and consciously update our own internal psychological software to effectively deal with this massive influx of highly complex, modern data. This absolutely requires developing a profound, highly critical mental filter that automatically rejects highly emotional narratives entirely masquerading as objective facts. You must actively train yourself to become deeply suspicious of absolutely any explanation that perfectly and neatly answers incredibly complex global problems. The highly comforting, completely absolute certainty provided by a dark narrative is almost always the first major red flag of a beautifully crafted lie. Genuine, profound truth is completely comfortable with deep nuance, highly complex variables, and the absolute admission that some things are simply unknown. It absolutely does not require a highly cinematic villain or a deeply terrifying global plot to mathematically explain why a specific financial market crashed. We must actively learn to find deep, profound peace within that high level of uncertainty, rather than desperately seeking false comfort in a terrifying story. This is the absolute core of true psychological resilience, the profound ability to look at massive chaos and completely resist the urge to invent a demon. By completely letting go of the desperate, highly anxious need for a massive master plan, we entirely free ourselves to actively engage with reality. We can finally stop acting as highly terrified, completely passive victims of a hypothetical global conspiracy and start acting as highly capable independent strategists. A highly rational, deeply grounded mind is absolutely the most incredibly powerful tool you can possess in a world entirely addicted to collective panic. It completely allows you to quickly identify the highly lucrative, deeply hidden opportunities that are constantly created during massive periods of economic chaos. While everyone else is entirely paralyzed by the highly viral, terrifying stories of global doom, you can actively and quietly execute your own plans. You can profoundly analyze the cold, hard data, while the rest of society completely drowns in the highly dramatic, algorithmic waves of pure emotion. This massive psychological separation from the highly panicked herd is precisely where true, lasting generational wealth and profound personal peace are actively built. It entirely stems from the quiet, deeply radical choice to actively value boring, complex accuracy over thrilling, highly contagious, and deeply terrifying fiction. As we continuously navigate this highly complex, rapidly evolving digital era, the massive battle for our perception will only become increasingly intense and sophisticated. The massive, highly engaging algorithms will undoubtedly become significantly better at perfectly targeting our deepest, most profound psychological vulnerabilities and personal fears. Therefore, your absolute commitment to highly disciplined, profound critical thinking must become an incredibly unyielding, fiercely protected core aspect of your daily life. You must entirely commit to the highly difficult, deeply rewarding path of constantly questioning your own profound urge to believe the absolute worst. The absolute next time you are instantly captivated by a highly terrifying, perfectly framed story about the massive collapse of the modern world, remember this. Ask yourself profoundly, are we actually genuinely searching for the complex truth? Or are we just desperately searching for a story that feels completely true? Ultimately, the very things that are the absolute easiest to instantly believe are rarely the profound, complex things that are actually mathematically accurate. Sometimes the highly convincing, incredibly viral narrative is not a massive global reality, but simply a perfect mirror, perfectly reflecting our own deepest fears.